Leaving it there, looking at diversification of society, I want to come to the sixth part, the definition of interest. Briefly only, because it's a huge area employing psychology, employing anthropology, employing a variety of sciences contributing to the discussion there. Interest needs wants. A huge discussion in itself. Is an interest simply something we want, or is it a need, or how can we discuss it? I do not want to discuss this. I do not want to go into the Maslow pyramid, which always turns up here. And I do not want to look here as well at the discussion, more recent discussions of Amartya Sen, who discusses this as a matter of developmental policies and human aid. I want to look briefly at 4 points here. One kind of interest I mentioned already, the interest of associations and NGOs, the particularism. They have very particular interests. And it is this particularity that defines the interest. And the best way to understand it is by looking actually at other forms of interest. The one is, of course, the individual interest. It doesn't really exist, as we know, at least if we follow social equality ideas, because there is no such thing as an individual as such. It is always part of interaction, of processes, of relationships. But nevertheless, there is this individual that has a specific interest. It's not a particularistic interest, but a specific interest. Saying what it is extremely difficult, because it may be my interest is just that I would prefer red chairs here in the lecture theatre rather than having blue ones. But is this really an interest? I think there we would and should hesitate and say interest is something going further. Interest is not about subjective wants or subjective likes and dislikes, but interest is something where I have a demand to a wider area of society, where I have the demand to others, where my existence, or I see my existence depending on the fulfillment of this demand. It's not about liking or disliking. This doesn't really affect me. It may be an interest, actually, that I have in a specific color, because I'm colorblind. Then it matters. I don't know exactly what, but I think it is red and green, because I cannot see certain things which may end my life if I don't see them. The problem at every traffic light. So there is a certain interest that I have to deal with. It may be change the rules, not having red and green, but having different colors that are visible for everybody, or it may be the interest of having the security, somebody looks after me, I have to make a test, and if I cannot distinguish these colors, I won't get the driving license. Simple things like this. Individual interest has to be sorted out, otherwise something happens. It's not the particular interest. And the particularistic interest is something, another borderline, touching another borderline, which is the borderline to public interest. Groups gathering with a specific interest, with a particular interest, always are groups, and as such act in the public. They act in the public, and it means that this one interest, this particular interest, is being part of a public interest. At the same time, it is not. Because the public interest is something of the interest in the interest of the public, the interest of the entity, of the society, of the state, of the nation we live in. This is the public interest. The basic interest here, I would say, actually matches very much the definitions of social equality. It is about social cohesion. That you do not want, and that it cannot be interest of the public, that there is a huge gap, for instance, between rich and poor. We see the problem that all these societies are under pressure, and the increasing gap between rich and poor means at the same time that we have an increasing instability of these societies. Inclusion, exclusion, you can go to a certain point with excluding people, but a public interest is something that is affected by this if there is too much exclusion. It's a wide field of discussing these things, and it is a huge challenge to determine this public interest, and as well to see a public interest may be against the interest of individuals, because it may be in the public interest to have a quiet area where others want just to be loud and have their festivals every day, every night. You see this, the typical regulation when it comes to closing hours of pubs, of public places. The pub, the English term, is not just the place where you drink, but it is a public space. So you regulate this public space and say after 10 o'clock, please be quiet, because there are neighbors around this public space, a larger public, that has the interest possibly of going to bed at 10 o'clock. And if you are singing your songs there, it disturbs their interest. Most difficult and the most important is then the general interest. Question, is there something of a general interest if we look at a diversified society, of a society that is split into different groups, groups with different interests, different classes, different social groups. A society that is departmentalized and where policies are differentiated, segmented, departmentalized. It's a difficult question, and it links back to what I said about the social contracts. The idea of a general interest being not only the interest of a public entity as the state, or the state may be the municipality or the central state, something in between, but a general interest where you say, okay, there are certain norms, certain values, certain needs that are actually going beyond this entity, but they are possibly human needs. It is a difficult question as well, because we face the problem that these societies are not only split on the national level, but as well on the international level, on the global level, global scale. There's a paradox of history, not only the cunning of reason, but the cunning of irresponsibility, that those people who claim actually there is a general interest, and we all have to cut back, for instance, currently in the situation of global crisis, that these people say this is the general interest, but very much neglect the interest of those who suffer most. The so-called third world countries, or countries, developing countries, are suffering most from the current crisis. At the same time, people say, well, this is not really the general interest. We don't have to look after them. We do not have to secure human rights on this level. But what we have to look at is regulate the system that everybody behaves well. And if we are again getting richer, then we can look again after these people, no suffering. General interest is possibly not as general as the term suggests it would be. It is possibly only as general as the question of power of different interests can be resolved and can be resolved in a sustainable way. Because as we saw, the current system is not sustainable. The current interests are there for relatively small groups who maintain a certain status on the costs of others. I would like to close there the sixth part and go on to the seventh part, the European debate.